And you know, because agriculture is a major contributor to the growth in the continent, so anything that adversely affects agriculture will affect economic growth in general. And since employment and poverty eradication depends on growth, it means that indirectly you will have a major impact, negative impact on both jobs and the ability of countries to reduce poverty. The impact on agriculture will come in various ways. Number one is the impact of desertification, which is resulting from climate change in some parts of Africa, has really rendered agriculture a non-viable, productive activity in those regions. The second thing is that there's also the variability in rain and sunshine, and the weather patterns have changed dramatically, so that when there is any variability in rain, if you're practicing rain-fed agriculture, it will adversely affect your ability to produce. So the crop productions will reduce significantly, threatening livelihoods. And another dimension is the flooding, because the coastal countries are either being washed away or there's excessive flooding in many countries in Africa. We've seen it happen across the continent, from Mozambique to Nigeria to many other places where it has really destroyed crops. And so these are things that will be harmful to agriculture, especially the type of agriculture that is practiced in the continent. And so the impact will be severe. It will continue if nothing is done to either adapt to this change, but more importantly, to minimize the emission of greenhouse gases through low carbon practices, so that we can begin to mitigate the impact of the climate change. Yeah.
Now, the United Nations has an economic vulnerability index. I'm just interested to know, in the context of climate change and the green economy and the theme of this year's AEC, what are your comments on that?
On what? I'm sorry.
On the economic vulnerability index in the context of the green economy. I mean, the fact that African countries need to ensure, clean practices to reduce the vulnerability.
No, of course. You see, I think we should see the climate change problem as, climate change issue as both a problem and also an opportunity. Prime Minister Emmanuel said it very well yesterday when he pointed out that because Africa is beginning to industrialize, it has not gone into the path of dirty technology and dirty practices, and so it has in a better position to green its industrialization. In other words, to begin to practice those things. And he also highlighted the fact that many of the practices, especially in the area of agriculture, does not necessarily need additional resources. It is actually working more, working smarter and working more efficiently, and mobilizing the labor that we have available. Now, as far as vulnerability issue is concerned, obviously, we're beginning to see that vulnerability is a major issue, especially economic vulnerability, but there are other kinds of vulnerabilities. So if we want to be finding out, why, some of the things that can affect the population negatively, it's important to maybe, look at the vulnerability index as something that will be an indicator of the needs that countries have and how much risk that they face, whether it's from environmental degradation or from, issues that relate to economic shocks or other kinds of problems.
Final question. African ministers met in Bamako last year, and they committed themselves to the green economy, green practices. The big question right now is the action. We're having COP17, another talk shop. What have you seen since 2010 going forward that the African ministers have actually implemented, and what would you like them to do?
No, I think there's more and more realization in Africa that with or without any agreement on the negotiations on this Conference of Parties, COP17 coming up in Durban soon, with or without any agreement by the international community to either reduce emissions, and take mitigation actions, or to at least fulfill the pledges that they made, since they are responsible for the problems that African countries are facing, that African countries cannot simply wait and until they get any support from outside. That they themselves will have to face the problem, even though they didn't cause it. But at the same time, strengthening their negotiating power and mobilizing international opinion and support in that. So it's important for African countries to continue to be engaged, speaking with one voice, having the facts there, continue to put some political pressure to be able to get the compensation that they deserve. They're not asking for any help or any aid from anybody. They did not cause the climate problem, but they're suffering the consequences. But having said that, this is where green economy comes into the picture. In other words, greening the economy, which can be a way to essentially begin to address the problem. By trying to do things that will help them adapt better to the climate change, but at the same time, by not worsening the problem by following the path of the other countries that have already caused the problem. The reason is because Africa will suffer more than anyone else. So you cannot say, let's continue with this kind of dirty development strategy. But they will have to do a number of things. Number one is to capitalize on their natural capital. Because if you look at the Central African region, Congo, Gabon, there's a whole lot of forest coverage there. So maybe begin to capitalize upon that through ecotourism, through smart kind of logging and so on and so forth, making sure that you preserve those to utilize it for economic purposes. The second dimension of that is agricultural modernization, practicing agriculture that is more sustainable, not going the same path. Some countries are already doing that in Mali, in Senegal. They're all beginning to either reduce excessive dependence on chemicals, or practicing some kind of organic farming that is now becoming more and more popular. The second dimension is to really embark upon green industrialization, and I've already mentioned that, whereby it is to look at different kinds of industries that, or when you are industrializing, you pay attention to low carbon emission to make sure that that's not going to go through the other one. But of course, this will require a lot of support for technology transfer, as well as support from many countries that are already advanced in green technologies. The other dimension is energy. African countries, in their bid to transform their economies from low-income agrarian to high-income industrial and post-industrial societies, will require a lot of energy. But they don't have to use energy that uses fossil fuels, especially for the countries that do not have oil. They have an opportunity to think about renewable and sustainable energy sources, whether it is wind or solar or hydro, that can help them to maybe to industrialize and provide energy that will help the industrialization process. And the last but not the least is the issue of policy and institutions, to make sure that they set up the policies, the institutions that will get rid of some bad policies or the bottlenecks that you have that will prevent moving forward, but at the same time to mobilize support from the private sector and from everybody else.